I appreciate you guys visiting and viewing this video. My name is Sergio Estevio. I'm going to discuss the various federal income-driven repayment programs, IDR, Pay-As-You-Earn, and Repay, with the specific audience of medical students and which of these income-driven repayment programs they should consider as they enter residency. So they're completing medical school and entering a residency. Just an attempt at humor here with that little cartoon. At the rate I'm going, my student loan should be paid off in 3 years. His response is, "That's great, Dad." Just a brief introduction. If you have questions or concerns, feel free to reach out to me, and I'll try to address them as quickly as possible. I think one good starting point is to address provide an overview of the various federal income-driven repayment programs. The first one introduced in 2009 was income-based repayment. Those are some highlights of the program terms. 15% of discretionary income, and discretionary income is essentially your adjusted gross income minus the poverty income level for your family size and state of residence. The state of residence is only affected if you live in Hawaii or the state of Alaska. The poverty income level for those two states are higher than the 48 continuous states. But again, it's 15% of discretionary income, which is defined as adjusted gross income minus the poverty income level is equal to your discretionary income. The second bullet point there is that you have a 25-year repayment program, and should you no longer demonstrate a partial financial hardship or you opt out of IDR, all the unpaid interest is capitalized. To no longer demonstrate a partial financial hardship, essentially kind of a general rule of thumb is that your adjusted gross income equals or exceeds your student loan balance for IDR specifically. So if you have, say, $200,000 of federal student loans, then your AGI would have to exceed about $200,000 in order to no longer demonstrate a partial financial hardship. That's not the same for pay or repay. It's about 140 to 150%, or 1.4 or 1.5 times your original student loan balance when you entered repayment. So if you had $200,000 of student loans, then that threshold jumps up to about $280,000 to maybe $300,000 of AGI in order to no longer demonstrate a partial financial hardship with respect to pay and repay. Who's eligible to participate with IDR? Essentially anyone with federal loans. Pay-As-You-Earn, I think, was introduced in December of 2012. Here it's 10% of discretionary income. So it's the monthly payments are a third lower than IDR. It has a 20-year repayment period. And again, if you don't demonstrate a partial financial hardship or you opt out of pay, the interest is capitalized. As I mentioned, your AGI has to be about 1.4 to 1.5 times greater than your student loan balance when you enter pay in order to no longer demonstrate a partial financial hardship. Who's eligible to participate? This is more restrictive. You can't have any loans issued on or before October 1st of 2007, and only direct loans are eligible for Pay-As-You-Earn. So if you have a mix of FFEL loans or Perkins loan, or possibly some other federal loans, you might have to consolidate your loans in order to convert them into direct loans, therefore eligible for Pay-As-You-Earn. But the condition is that you can't have any federal loans issued on or before October 1st. REPAYE of 2007. REPAYE was introduced so that it isn't as restrictive as pay-as-you-earn, based on that initial criteria of having not having loans issued on or before October 1st of 2007. So with REPAYE, it's 10% of discretionary income, so same as PAYE, which are a third less than IDR. And the real benefit, particularly for medical students who are entering residency or even in residency, is the 50% interest subsidy on any month-to-month negative amortization or interest accrual or unpaid interest. Given the fact that you have modest incomes during residency, this is probably the compelling reason to select REPAYE. With these conditions also, being aware of these other bullet points. If you do have a spouse, then your spouse's income will be considered regardless of your filing status. There is a strategy within PAYE or IDR to file separately to exclude the spouse's income from consideration in determining your income-driven repayment program. But with REPAYE, it's specifically designed to always include your spouse's income regardless of filing status. So if you choose to file separately, it's still considered. If you choose to file jointly, it's still considered. This would be an issue if your spouse has relatively high income and no student debt. If your spouse does have student debt, it may be federal student debt, it may be still to your benefit to be in REPAYE and possibly both of you to be in REPAYE. So that's one of the concerns with REPAYE, that the spouse's income will be considered if you do have a spouse. The other concern is with REPAYE is that it does not have this monthly payment cap, whereas pay-as-you-earn, the amount that you would pay would be limited to no more than the standard 10-year repayment. Whereas REPAYE, there is no monthly repayment cap, or payment cap, excuse me. And this becomes an issue when you become an attendee, typically. But at that point, once you completed your residency and or your fellowships and you become an attendee, it's probably in your interest to reevaluate whether you should remain in an income-driven repayment program or not, whether it's IDR or PAYE. Maybe switch from REPAYE to PAYE if your attending income does cause you to exceed the 10-year standard monthly payment amount. Maybe opt into PAYE, or you could consider refinancing to a private lender such as Sophie or DRB, First Republic. The concern being there, if you do decide to refinance, is that you have to evaluate what the interest rate environment is at that point. Right now, the interest rate environment is very competitive with historical lows for these products, but that's not to say 2 or 3, 4 years down the line that it still remains competitive. But for most residents, I would probably strongly consider selecting REPAYE, and I'll describe why in a spreadsheet in just a second. It is limited to only direct loans, so if you do have FFELP loans and or Perkins loan, you would want to consolidate, but there's reason to consolidate regardless of whether or not you have non-direct loans. So let me go into kind of a spreadsheet, and I'll start off with pay-as-you-earn to give you kind of a point of comparison. So I'm assuming that this individual has $300,000 outstanding at an interest rate of 6.5%. I do recommend that as soon as you complete medical school, so let's assume that you graduate in May and start your residency in July, I would suggest that you consolidate your loans immediately upon graduation from medical school and before you start your residency. This is for several reasons. One, you want to be able to enter REPAYE as soon as possible, because the vast majority of graduate loans are unsubsidized. So they're accruing interest during any periods of non-payment. So if you can enter REPAYE sooner, you would benefit from that 50% interest subsidy. So you're effectively reducing that interest accrual by 50% by waiving your grace period. And the only way you can waive your grace period is to consolidate. Again, so you would want to do this immediately after graduating from med school and before you start your residency. Now, the second reason you want to do that is that you want to be able to report zero income. So they typically, when completing a consolidation application and choosing REPAYE, they'll look back at your prior tax year. So the assumption is your prior tax year, you're MS3, you have no income at that point, and you'll be able to report a zero income. And for that first year in REPAYE, so say from the period beginning July 1st through June 30th of the following year, you'll have zero payments because the third year of medical school and you had no income during that period. So that's reflected here. So you have an adjusted gross income of zero. As a result, your monthly payments are zero. But because of this outstanding balance with an interest rate of 6.5%, you've accrued $19,500 or a negative amortization amount of $19,500. Negative amortization essentially is what you underpaid in interest for that particular period. In this case, I'm looking at annual amounts. So for that year, you've underpaid the interest by $19,500. So the second year, let's assume that you had an adjusted gross income of $25,000, and this is based on that first half year of residency from the period of July through December. So you had an AGI of $25,000. As a result of that, then your payments for that second cycle of pay would be $55.38. So your negative amortization for that period, that second year of pay, is about $18,800. So over the course of 2 years, you've underpaid the interest by $38,000. But over the course of 2 years, you only made $664 of payments toward your student loans. I'm assuming a 5-year residency. So here, for the third year of the income-driven repayment program, I assume $50,000 of adjusted gross income, which results in about $260 per month payment. Negative AM or interest accrual for that third year is at about $16,400. After 3 years, you're almost at $55,000 of interest accrual. So your total balance at that point is at about $355,000. And for that third year of pay, you paid about $3,100 of interest, payments, which is applied to the interest. So you can see how it goes forward. So let's move ahead at this point. We have $54,000 of adjusted gross income, about $283 per month in payments. You're still accruing interest for that particular year at $16,000. So over the course of 5 years, you have about $87,000 of interest accrual, and you can move forward. Here at year 6, what I'm assuming is that you become an attendee. So for half year, you're a resident. So from January through June, you're a resident. Then as of July 1st, then you become an attendee, and subsequently get that attending income. So I say $180,000. Your payments jump up to about $1,300 a month. You're still underpaying the interest accrual by about $3,500. So at this point, your unpaid interest is at about $90,000. So your new balance is approximately $390,644. In that particular year, you paid about $16,000 towards your student loan payments. And what I'm going to do here is switch from this pay-as-you-earn analysis spreadsheet simulation to the REPAYE. And I'll switch back and forth, but keep in mind at this point you've accrued about $90,000 of interest. The benefit with REPAYE is the 50% interest subsidy. So the same information, the same variables, $300,000 outstanding once you enter REPAYE at 6.5%. So as a result of that, you consolidate your loans immediately after graduating med school before the start of residency. This produces a zero payment because your prior year income was zero. The negative AM remains the same at $19,500, but because of that interest subsidy, that 50% interest subsidy, you've saved $9,750. The unpaid interest is the amount, the cumulative amount that you're responsible, the borrower is responsible for, but in essence, you've saved that amount as well. So after 1 year, you're only responsible for $9,750. Your balance after 1 year with the principal and the accrued interest is at $390,750. You made no payments. So these numbers are the same. Years 1 through 6 as pay-as-you-earn. So these payments are the same. So let's look at this point. So your monthly payment is about $1,327. You're still accruing interest of about $3,500, but over the life of the loan, at this point, your unpaid principal is unpaid interest is at $45,000. Again, it's half of what the pay is. So at pay, it's at $90,644. So REPAYE is half that amount. So you save $45,000 by selecting REPAYE. So at this point, you're at $345,000 total outstanding balance, and the total amount that you paid is $15,930. So it's the same as pay. So the amount that you paid in REPAYE and pay are the same. It's that 50% interest subsidy that is the compelling reason to select REPAYE. So at this point, once you're an attending, then it becomes a matter of whether you want to remain in the income-driven repayment programs or select potentially some other repayment option, staying within the federal system, or potentially considering private lenders to refinance at more competitive rates. But at this point, what happens is that your income is sufficient to cover the interest accrual plus an additional payment. So at this point, at $250,000, your monthly payment is $1,900 a month. So that $1,900 a month is sufficient to cover the accruing interest plus an additional $3,300. That additional payment gets applied to this outstanding unpaid interest and buys down that unpaid interest. So at the end of this point, the 7th year, once you become an attending for a full year, then the outstanding balance begins to drop because, again, your payments are sufficient to cover the interest due. That additional $3,300 gets applied to the unpaid interest first before it starts to buy down the principal. So not until this point, that'll be about year 14, given these income assumptions, and I'm assuming at this point, going forward, your income increases 3% annually. And at the 14th year, then your payments are sufficient to cover the remaining balance due. Then it begins to buy down the principal. So, in most cases, again, I would recommend those individuals once they leave the residency, complete the residency and their fellowship, and become an attendee, then you need to reevaluate your repayment strategy to see if it remains optimal in terms of staying in your current repayment option or consider some repayment option. But again, what I would suggest is, look at REPAYE because the interest accrual is mitigated as compared to pay as you earn. You save $45,000 in this example by choosing REPAYE. And the one condition that I would consider that you analyze on an individual basis is if you're married, your spouse has some significant income but doesn't have student loans. If your spouse does have federal student loans, it may be in your best interest to both be in REPAYE, particularly when your income isn't sufficient to support the interest payment and you want to benefit from that interest subsidy. Just to provide kind of a summary, I would suggest that you consolidate through the federal government at studentloans.gov immediately after completing your medical school and before you start your residency. During the consolidation process, you'll be able to select REPAYE, and also you'll be able to waive your grace period. The reason you want to waive your grace period is to enter REPAYE as soon as possible. Again, as a graduate student, most of your loans are unsubsidized, and during periods of non-payment, you're accruing interest. So you want to be able to enter REPAYE as soon as possible to get that 50% interest subsidy. And in your consolidation application, a question they'll ask is whether or not you want your application delayed until after the grace period. I would suggest no, select it, immediately consolidate your loans in order to benefit from the interest subsidy, the REPAYE interest subsidy as soon as possible. Then annually you'll need to recertify your federal income driven repayment program, so you'll be able to select REPAYE on an annual basis while you're in residency. The loan servicer will contact you by email 2 to 3 months in advance of when you have to recertify. If you forget to recertify, then potentially you'll fall back into the default repayment, which is the 10-year standard repayment amount. So you want to avoid that if you can, and it's fairly simple. It's an online process to recertify, which takes you about 5 minutes to complete. Then once you've completed your residency and you're becoming an attendee, then I would suggest that you consider reevaluating your repayment options. Given that your income is going to increase dramatically, it may not be in your best interest to remain in an income-driven repayment program. But one of the considerations is if you're pursuing public service loan forgiveness. So public service loan forgiveness, I'll make an assumption here that you're familiar with it. But if you're in a nonprofit organization for 10 years, then any remaining balance is forgiven and currently is not considered taxable income to you. So if you're pursuing public service loan forgiveness, then the consideration would be to remain in the federal income-driven repayment program and probably to remain in REPAYE if that's the route that you're pursuing. But otherwise, if you become an attendee not pursuing public service loan forgiveness, you have to reassess your repayment strategy. Whether to remain in your current repayment option, switch to another federal repayment option. The reason you would probably want to switch from REPAYE is that your income may produce a monthly payment higher than the standard 10-year repayment amount. So if you decide to stay in a federal income-driven repayment option, then you might want to opt into pay-as-you-earn to cap that monthly payment at that 10-year standard payment amount if your attendance income produces a payment in excess of that 10-year standard amount if you're in REPAYE. Or you can switch to a private lender. I mentioned a few there, so BBR, Earnest, First Republic. You'll need to analyze the interest rate environment at the point that you're considering this. Certainly today the interest rate environment is very attractive, but that's not to say 2, 3, or 4 years down the line that it will remain a very competitive interest rate environment. So if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to me. You can contact me via email or give me a call, and we can discuss your specific concerns. I appreciate your time. Thank you very much.